We're beginning the Great Pyramid section of Manly P. Hall's book, The Phoenix, an illustrative review of occultism and philosophy. I guess we'll start off with the picture. The symbolic crucifixion, the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid. Looks kind of sketch. Next picture. And we'll begin. Supreme among the wonders of antiquity and unequaled by the achievements of subsequent architects and builders, the Great Pyramid of Giza bears mute witness to an unknown civilization that, having endured its predestined span, passed into the dim oblivion of prehistoric times. Who were the illumined mathematicians who planned its parts and dimensions, the master craftsmen who supervised its construction, the cunning workmen who trued its stones? Eloquent in its silence, inspirational in its majesty, divine in its simplicity, the Great Pyramid is indeed a sermon in stone. Its awesomeness beggars description. Its magnitude overwhelms the puny sensibilities of man, and among the shifting sands of time it stands as a fitting emblem of eternity itself. The Great Pyramid is the unsolved riddle of the ages. Years have been devoted by eminent scholars to the study of its many marvels, but no matter how profound these intellects have been, the pyramid has proven itself to be still more profound. One learned Egyptologist, after devoting the best years of his life to its study, declared that a complete understanding of the pyramid's true purpose would require a perfect knowledge of not only every art and science known to mankind, but also many others of which present humanity is unaware. Our race has turned to the goal of objective attainment. It is conquering the visible, tangible universe which surrounds it and of which it is a part. It is flying through the air and sailing under the sea. It is exploding electrons and projecting magnificent units of electrical energy through the invisible vistas of space. It is manufacturing guns that will hurl tons of metal many miles. It is reaching out into the unknown elements of nature in search of destructive forces which, if discovered, will jeopardize the destiny of the planet itself. Yet, with all this knowledge, man is hopelessly ignorant of himself. He is ignorant of the causes which brought him into being, the reason why he is a manifesting creature, and the ultimate toward which he is being swept with irresistible force. Whereas we explore the visible, antiquity explored the invisible. I messed that up. Whereas we explore the visible, antiquity explored the invisible. Whereas we construct machines to do our labor, they called upon elements and with that power possessed by primitive peoples controlled the air, the earth, the fire, the water, and made servants out of the winds, which is more they accomplished all. Damn. What is more, they accomplished all this without following that circuitous route by which modern civilization seeks to attain the same end. We declare the Great Pyramid of Giza to be the imperishable monument of ancient achievement, a divine legacy from the unknown past, constructed at the cost of infinite labor and infinite patience, that all posterity may know the will of the gods and the path of attainment. In its measurements man may read, as in a book, that secret doctrine which the first civilizations of antiquity bequeathed to their heirs, successors, and assigns, in view of the numerous eminent authorities who have written concerning the physical dimensions and composition of the Great Pyramid, it does not seem advisable to spend much time on ground already so thoroughly covered. We will therefore merely touch on a few highlights of its construction and then pass on to a a consideration of its philosophical significance. While not the tallest of structures, the Great Pyramid is undoubtedly the largest building in the world. It has a ground area of a trifle less than 13 acres, covers nearly 3 times as much space as the Vatican at Rome, and is over 150 feet higher than St. Paul's Cathedral. The baseline of each of its sides is over 750 feet in length, and its vertical height is about 482 feet. The weight of the Great Pyramid is estimated to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 5,273,834 tons, while the weight of the Earth is estimated at, I can't even read that number. Yeah, I'm not even going to attempt. Oh, God damn it. 52730. And how many is it? 1, 3, 6, 9, 12. 5,273 with 12 zeros. Pyramid tons. It is noteworthy that the first 4 figures in each calculation are the same. The age of the Great Pyramid has the subject of much speculation and dispute. Up to recent years, it would have been stark heresy to declare a building to be more than 7,000 years old. At the utmost, because science, controlled by theology, dared not disagree with the orthodox findings of bigoted theological historians. But as that day has passed and estimates now place the age of the earth at over 300 million years, it is possible to approach much closer to the probable facts than it was in the last century. The prevalent idea, wait a minute, 300 billion years, I think. 1's 10's 100,000. Yeah, 300 million. It is possible to approach much closer to the probable facts than it was in the last century. The prevalent idea that the Great Pyramid was built a few thousand years BC is controverted by all the evidence at hand. Distinct marks of erosion are now to be seen high up on the sides of the Great Pyramid, which to some authorities is proof that in the infinite past, the waves of a great sea nearly 300 feet in depth broke against its ancient walls. There is no record of any such flood in historic times. Even biblical historians are prone to admit the Great Pyramid was erected before the flood and that it was the deluge of Noah that left the erosion marks upon its walls. The Great Pyramid is at least 25,000 years old. It is much more likely to be from 60,000 to 100,000 years old. It stood long before the Egyptians established their post-Atlantean empire. It was the house of God, one scientist, after estimating with great care the intricacies of its construction, bowed his head and said, "None but God himself could have built it. It was not the work of man." We affirmed that man, however, did build it, but we declare it was not the man that modern science advances as representative of the human race 100,000 years ago. It was no Pithecanthropus, Piltdown, or Neanderthal man with brain capacity but little in advance of the anthropoid, who truded stones or calculated its relationship to the motion of the heavenly bodies. No stone hatchet man worked out its mathematical equations. No cave dweller mixed its indestructible mortar. Its achievements were the achievements of a race of supermen excelling in pursuits of which modern civilization is comparatively ignorant. It is possible that somewhere in the dim past this earth was peopled by a mighty race as resplendent in scientific achievement as it was profound in philosophic precept. A myopic scientist will most likely answer absurd, impossible, yet the fact remains that the builders of the Great Pyramid were well acquainted with both the mysteries of universal dynamics and the nature of the human soul. The wisdom possessed by the ancients seemed to have been epitomized in the structure of the Great Pyramid, and he who solves its riddle must necessarily be as wise as he who contrived it. The Great Pyramid is the perfect emblem of divinity, the absolute symbol of humanity, the complete type of nature, and the image of time, eternity, and existence. In one simple geometrical figure constructed according to an eternal principle is to set forth the secret of all things, all processes, all laws, and all truth. Using the pyramid measurements as a basis, Mr. William Petrie computed the distance of the sun from the earth as 91,840,000 miles, which was about 3.5 million miles less than the accepted mean distance. Several years later, the distance was recalculated by an international gathering of astronomers who estimated the true mean distance to be 91,500,000 miles away. In all probability, the Great Pyramid measurement is more accurate than even these later findings. It is therefore evident that the men who built the Great Pyramid were not only astronomers, but their skills in computing celestial distances was at least equal to our own. While it is undoubtedly true that many of the pyramids were used as tombs, it is quite certain that the Great Pyramid of Giza was never intended as a sepulchral vault. No mummified body was ever found in it, and the sarcophagus in the king's chamber is suspected of having been constructed for any one of a dozen purposes, ranging from a baptismal font to a grand bin, leaving the materialist to flounder in the midst of incalculable sums and endless contradictions. Let us examine the form and composition of the Great Pyramid in the light of the Egyptian esotericism, the secret doctrine of the priests. The Great Pyramid stands with its four faces to the four cardinal angles. The entrance part way up the sides is in the north and so cleverly concealed that it is practically invisible from below. The entrance consists of a square surmounted by a triangle, thus signifying that the earth is surmounted by spirit. The entrance is hidden to signify that the way of the light is difficult to find. The narrow is the gate that leads to eternal life, and none may enter except he bowed his head to the inevitable. The square base of the pyramid in the mystery signifies its sure foundation upon earth, for nature is the base upon which must be raised the divine house. The structure of wisdom must have a solid foundation in the laws of nature. As the word pyramid signifies light and fire, it is a material edifice built in the symbolic form of a flame, with its point upward. This point may be considered as an indicator that wisdom is above and ignorance is below. The square base further represents the four elements and the sides of the four spirits which guarded the angles of the world. Among the ancient Egyptians, the triangle or the pyramid was symbolic of immortality, for it was a point rising out of a square, thus signifying the resurrection of spirit out of matter. The one out of the four, the 5 points. I messed that up. Among the ancient Egyptians, the triangle or pyramid was symbolic of immortality, for it was a point rising out of a square, thus signifying the resurrection of spirit out of matter. The one out of the four, The 5 points are the number of the priests and also the secret Pythagorean emblem of man. The 5 is the initiator, the dragon slayer, he who attains to self by the destruction of the not self. In substantiation to our belief that the Great Pyramid was the sacred house of the mysteries, we quote from that eminent authority on Masonic symbolism, Albert Churchward. We contend that the Great Pyramid of Giza was built in Egypt as a monument and lasting memorial of this early religion on true scientific laws by divine inspiration and knowledge of the laws of the universe. Indeed, we may look on the Great Pyramid as the first true Masonic temple in the world, surpassing all others that have ever been built. This thought opens up a great field of speculation. Was the Great Pyramid the true house of Solomon? Was the architect of that house the immortal Hiram Abiff, whose name means our father Hiram, or the creative fire? Were the stones for the Great Pyramid cut by bronze saws with teeth made of diamonds, or were they cut by means of cosmic fire, or the shemar with which Moses cut the jewels for the breastplate of the high priest? What was the shemar, the sacred stone which disintegrated anything it touched? Was it the great magical agent of the universe focused upon a point prepared according to the secrets of the mysteries? We favor the idea that the Great Pyramid was the real Solomon's temple. We know the allegory has been sadly distorted, and while to the modern Mason it may seem incredible that the Great Pyramid could be the birthplace to his craft, we would ask him to answer 2 questions. What building greater than the pyramid has any architect or any craftsman executed upon the face of the earth? For the administration, for the 3 decades of Blue Lodge Masonry, what structure more fitting than the Great Pyramid could be found, with its 3 appropriate chambers and a sarcophagus ready at hand in the king's chamber for the giving of the Master Mason's degree? Egypt has always been regarded as the land of mystery. She surpassed all other nations in her knowledge of architectonics, chemistry, and astronomy. She is looked upon as being the cradle of science and philosophy, and while I gotta start this over again. I totally forgot who we were talking about. Egypt has always been regarded as the land of mystery. Oh, she, as in Egypt, She surpassed all other nations in her knowledge of architectonics, chemistry, and astronomy. She is looked upon as being the cradle of science and philosophy, and while we know comparatively little concerning the exact nature of Egyptian culture, we are continually confronted by evidence of its superiority. In fact, we know a great deal less about Egypt than we care to admit, and being fundamentally materialistic, most Egyptologists have given little consideration to the religious equation, the supreme element in the history and civilization of all ancient nations. In spite of all evidence to the contrary, we shall yet discover that the Rosetta Stone is not the key to the Egyptian hieroglyphics. We shall yet realize that the true meaning of the Egyptian ideographs has never been revealed. We are totally ignorant of the knowledge possessed by the better minds of the ancient Egyptian world for a very simple reason. The Egyptians, like all other enlightened races, divided their knowledge into 2 parts, exoteric and esoteric. The exoteric was that portion of learning revealed to the many, and the esoteric that part reserved for the illumined few, and never reduced to writing save in form of hieroglyphics and symbols, which were meaningless without that key which was the treasured possession of the initiated priestcraft. The Egyptian culture with which we are conversant is only the exoteric part revealed to the uninitiated multitudes of the ancient empire. The finer culture, the real wisdom of the Egyptians was preserved for the elect, and our world is far too gross and materialistic to comprehend the subtleties of Egyptian esotericism. Therefore, we grope blindly amidst images and emblems with which we, finding no meaning for them, pronounce meaningless. According to the secret teachings, the Great Pyramid was the tomb of Osiris, the black god of the Nile. Osiris represents a certain phase of solar energy, and therefore his house or tomb is emblematic of the universe within which he is entombed. And upon the cross which he is crucified. Thus, the Great Pyramid is not a lighthouse, an observatory, or a tomb, but a temple. W. Marsham Adams calls it the house of the hidden places, and such indeed it was, for it represented the inner sanctuary of Egyptian wisdom, or perhaps it would be more accurate to say pre-Egyptian wisdom. Hermes was the Egyptian god of wisdom and letters, the divine illuminator, worshipped through the planet Mercury, and ancient references to the effect that the pyramid was the house of Hermes emphasized anew the fact that it was in reality the supreme temple of the invisible and supreme deity. In all probability, the Great Pyramid was the first temple of the mysteries, the first structure erected as a repository for those secret truths which are the certain foundation of all modern arts and sciences. The Great Pyramid, says the secret book, is the perfect emblem of the microcosm, or man, and the microcosm is the universe, The Great Pyramid, says the secret book, is the perfect emblem of the microcosm, or man, and the microcosm is the inversion of the macrocosm. The macrocosm is the universe without, consisting of unnumbered stars and planets, encircled by the mighty egg of cosmic space. All that is in the macrocosm is to be found in miniature in the microcosm. As man is the image of God, so the Great Pyramid is the image of the universe. And what is more, it is, and what it is, this old time writing, man. That or I'm just retarded. I'm probably just retarded. A man is the image of God. Okay, I'm retarded. All that is in the macrocosm is to be found in miniature in the microcosm. As man is the image of God, so is the Great Pyramid is the image of the universe. And what is more, it is scientifically correct as an image of the universe. Many authors have treated the physical marvels of the Great Pyramid, but the modern world is still so ignorant of ancient superphysics that it fails to grasp the subtle import of primitive symbolism and religion. We know that such structures as the Great Pyramid, the Cretan Labyrinth, and the Delphian Oracle were erected to conceal and yet perpetuate certain definite scientific and philosophic theorems. The policy of the ancient world was concealment. Knowledge was never revealed except through parables and allegories. Facts were never directly expressed, they were hinted at. Planets were personified as gods and goddesses. The sun was a shining-faced man with flowing golden locks, and the earth was the Great Mother, her true nature concealed under veils and robes that only the illumined might remove. Elements were personified. The universe was an egg. Force was a dragon. Wisdom was a serpent. Evil was a grotesque image. Part crocodile, part hog. The absolute was a globe. The threefold creative power was a triangle, and the fourfold universe of material substance was a square, or again, spirit was a point, manifestation was a line, intelligence was a surface, and substance was a solid. Thus, it is evident that symbolism was the universal language of the ancients. We may laugh at their curious myths and accuse them of idolatry and ignorance, but we are the ones that are ignorant and superficial when we assume that the great minds of antiquity, the founders of the arts and sciences, and the patrons of learning were ignorant of the true state of nature of divine humanity. I'm going to show the picture on the previous page. The Lord of the Secret House. Kind of looks like Moloch. There we are. Somewhere in the dim forgotten ages, primitive man, still responsive to the subtle influences of nature, and still without separating power of individual thought, carved in stone or preserved as tradition and legends certain rudimentary knowledge. He may have secured this knowledge by a process of natural receptivity or from some previous race that inhabited this earth before the coming of the present humanity. After the lapse of ages, this unknown people became the fabled gods who walked the earth and talked with man in the first days of his existence. Many of the Platonists believed that existence was eternal, that the universe had never been constructed and would never be dissolved, that the worlds had always been, and that over the face of them swept periodic waves of force and power. While modern science refutes the theory and produces evidence that the universe come into being and go out of existence, still the world is very old and humanity is very young. No one knows who our progenitors were. It may be true that man rose up from the muck and mire of the prehistoric fens, that first he appeared as mosses and lichens, leaving no record on the molten surface of the azoic rocks. But the true origin of life is spiritual, not physical, and it is also quite certain that side by side with the growing forms of men and beasts there has advanced a mysterious and secret culture whose outward expression we recognize as religion, philosophy, science, and ethics, and in its innermost sense as knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. Man has never been without knowledge of his origin and the purpose of his existence. Those divine powers who regulate the destiny of creation, who manifest works bear witness to their reality, but whose form no man has seen, have always had their covenant with men. They have always been represented among humanity by certain sages and prophets. The temples were the houses of these gods dedicated to their worship, protected from all desecration and cleansed of all evil. That to these sanctified areas in the midst of a world of sin and strife, the gods might come and there deliver to the tribes, nations, and races those laws and mandates necessary to human survival. While the world has more rapid progress in scientific lines, it can claim but little religious growth in thousands of years. We are still unstrung by the battles of sectarianism. We are still pushed and pulled by contending theological factions. And as the supreme proof of our spiritual ignorance, we still have a number of contradictory schools of religious thought. In other words, our little backyard world harbors scores of little backyard creeds. It therefore has no true religion, for it is quite evident that divinity is a unity, and therefore can only be worshipped in unity and not in diversity. While it is undoubtedly necessary that there be numerous forms of religion adapted to racial limitations, national attitudes, and geographic environments, still it is equally true that those religions must comprehend their own fundamental unity and realize that their differences are not in essentially, but in the essentiality. God, these are huge sentences, my God. While it is undoubtedly necessary that there be numerous forms of religion adapted to racial limitations, national attitudes, and geographical environments, still it is equally true that those religions must comprehend their own fundamental unity and realize that their differences are not in essentiality, but in triviality. While the ignorant masses worshipped at the altars of this god or that god, the wise men of antiquity were not fettered by religious prejudice, but recognized in these hosts of divinities the personified emanations and attributes of one supreme Father. Accordingly, the Greeks went forth in search of wisdom, and their quest led them into the temples of every faith and doctrine of the world. Did the religion of the Greek philosopher limit him to Zeus, Rhea, Hermes, or the numerous other deities whose marble images sat in the magnificent temples rising on the brow of Acropolis? Assuredly not. The Greek initiates were received into the mysteries of Egypt, Persia, Chaldea, Babylonia, Phoenicia, and India. Returning home again, they were not considered as heretics, false to their own gods, but as illumined and venerable sages, almost worthy of worship. The Greeks esteemed the excellence of the Brahmin thought, and likewise the Brahmins knew that the Chaldeans and the Phoenicians were not unlearned in natural lore. They exchanged freely with each other the knowledge they possessed, for Brahma was but the name of the nameless principle, and if the Greeks wished to call their deity Uranus, Kronos, or Zeus, what mattered it? It was the principle, not the name, that was worshipped. It was the wisdom, not the terminology, that was worthy of study. So among the initiates of antiquity there prevailed a great broadness and depth woefully lacking in the worldly wise men of today. In certain sanctified localities were erected temples, not to this cult or that creed, but to the world mystery religion, the one faith of mankind, the all-inclusive doctrine that sometime again must be recognized as the dominating religious institution of the world. From the east, the west, the north, and the south came the learned of all nations seeking acceptance into these sacred houses, which stood as gateways between the mysteries of visible nature and the mysteries of the casual universe. The Great Pyramid was such a sacred edifice dedicated to the god Hermes, the personification of universal wisdom. To gain admission there, a man need not be of Egyptian blood, nor of any particular race or creed. There were but two requisites. He must be clean in heart, mind, and body, and he must desire wisdom with a desire stronger than that for life itself. So for every part of the ancient world seekers after truth came to the house of the hidden places to learn of God and nature, and to discover the arcane doctrine which may be revealed only to those who have passed successfully the tests and ordeals constituting the initiation rituals of the mysteries. We have said that the Great Pyramid is the symbol of the world. It is also the symbol of material existence, for physical life is a series of incidents taking place in certain environments and largely influenced by the environments in which they occur. Thus, it is evident that the various chambers and parts of the Great Pyramid signify esoterically the divisions and avenues of life. as the Cretan labyrinth contained within it the Minotaur, or Bullman, whose name in the secret language of the mysteries means the beast mind, and which devoured each year the quota of youths and maidens exacted by it as a tribute. So earthly life is a winding labyrinth of mystic passageways, and chambers within which dwell the minotauric beasts, temptation, sorrow, suffering, and death. Recall the story of Dante's descent into the Inferno, or the wanderings of Aeneas through the underworld under the guidance of the Cumaean Sibyl. Hades, the underworld of the Greeks and Egyptians, is not, as generally supposed, the sphere of the dead. In reality, Hades is the material physical world in which we live, our material physical lives. Though we believe ourselves to be alive, we but dwell in the underworld of the Greeks, for its tortuous subterranean passageways symbolize that span of earthly existence stretching from the cradle to the grave. According to the ancients, there are two gates, two mighty doors, one leading into the house of life and the other leading out. Man enters at the gate of Cancer, the ancient symbol of the world mother and the emblem of birth. After wandering this appointed span among the hollows and glooms of Hades or the Inferno, he passes into the haven of the gods through the celestial gate of Capricorn, by the side of which stands Saturn, the Reaper, symbolic of time and age. Thus, the two gates of the underworld are respectively the womb which leads in and the womb which leads out. In the underworld, Aeneas and Dante beheld the sorrows of the lost souls, the agony of the damned, and the curses of sin, lust, and degeneracy. According to the mysteries, these are the self-generated sufferings which man must endure because he permits himself to be controlled by his own lower nature. All this inferno is a dream and an illusion, like the Buddhist's wheel, to which man clings although he would be free if his mind could but let go. Hades is therefore the sphere in which those creatures dwell who are under the domination of the senses. Their agony is the agony of hopeless desire, the useless selfishness, and the sorrow which results from the vain struggle after a mirage. Hades is the dwelling place of those who have never discovered themselves, who have never realized reality, who have never attained self-consciousness. For when man finds himself, he rolls away the stone of his sepulture and ascends from the realms of death. The word death is a misnomer as we generally use it. Those are not dead who have laid aside this mortal coil. They really are dead who do not know themselves. Man, I butchered that. I have to redo that. The word death is a misnomer as we generally use it. Those who are not dead who have laid aside this mortal coil, they really are dead who do not know themselves. Death is ignorance, for those who are ignorant are buried in the cold stone coffin of their own limitations, knowing nothing, appreciating nothing, realizing nothing, achieving nothing. The mindless have never lived. Life is not merely animated existence. Life is thought. Life is achievement. Life is appreciation. Life is recognition. Life is realization. Life is aspiration. And most of all, life is understanding. To those who understand life, there can be no death. To those who do not understand the purpose of our sojourn here, there can be no life. The mysteries taught that there are two kinds of men, those who are awake and those who are asleep. So according to the mysteries... This fucking book, man, it's too big. Ah, shit. Fuck, I ripped it. Fuck. Where was I? The mysteries taught that there are two kinds of men, those who are awake and those who are asleep. So according to the mysteries, the ignorant lie sleeping, sleeping through all eternity, sleeping as worlds are made, sleeping as worlds perish again, sleeping as nations rise, sleeping as empires fall, surrounding by infinite opportunity and part of a plan based upon infinite growth. Those who are not initiated into the mystery of reality sleep in their narrow coffins of egotism, selfishness, and unawareness through all the eternities of time and being. Those who are awake live in the world of infinite light, infinite wisdom, infinite beauty, infinite opportunity, and infinite progress. To such all things are good. To such there is no death. All gradually they ascend the ladder of stars leading to the footstool of divinity itself. To these awakened ones the universe is home, and the myriads of stars and heavenly bodies are kindred hosts of celestial beings. All the world is a laboratory of experimentation. Every stick and stone preaches a sermon. Every living thing teaches a lesson. But to the sleeping ones, the world is a cold and dismal place. Every man is an enemy. Every plant is poisonous or thorny. Every beast snaps and howls. Every stone is sharp. Every problem is a disaster. Always the clouds obscure the face of the sun, and the heavenly lights are darkened. Life itself is a futile struggle against the inevitable, and the grave is its closing episode. Immortality is not the perpetuation of the body. It is an innate realization of the perpetuity of spirit. Once man gains consciousness of self, he can never lose it. Once he has learned to live, he cannot die. Though his form may change, life is the realization of life, and death is the lack of that realization. Could Plato, initiated into the nothingness of death, ever die? Could Socrates ever cease to be, who knew that by drinking the hemlock he was but liberating himself from the bonds and limitations of a world which could not understand? He realized that the fleshy house was not his real self, but that he changed his bodies as he changed his garments. Having arrived at the realization of truth, he was immortal. But what is truth? Whence comes the power which, when it is established in the soul of man, answers all things, solves all things, reveals all things, and supplies all things? What is that indescribable elixir which, when poured into the human soul, makes of the weakling a hero, of the poor man one of indescribable wealth, of the ignorant a divinely illumined sage, and of a man a god? We hear much of truth. It is a word on every man's tongue, but in few men's hearts. It can be revealed by one to another. Can it be revealed by one to another? It is tangible, intellectual reality, or is it an indescribable recognition of the relationship between the individual self and the universal self? What is this mysterious doctrine which lifts a man from the ranks of the mediocre and carries him to the very footstool of divinity? What is it that makes the martyr die with a smile upon his lips and with blessings for his executioners? What is it that inspires the artist to paint pictures which illumine the world? What is it that sounds as soft music in the ears of the great composer? What is it that moves the pen of the author that he may write books which will live forever in the hearts and souls of humanity? The symbol of that great power is the crux anasta, the cross of life, the golden key which unlocks the mysteries of the self, the golden key which all too often becomes a cross for the crucifixion of the illumined. And yet those who have this golden key smile at death, laugh at torture, and retiring into the sanctuary of themselves are sufficient for all their needs. This great and mysterious power, this great of divinely revealed truth, is what man gained when he was accepted into the house of the hidden places. For it is said that the mysteries either found a good man or made one. And though he started upon the road a scoffer, he ended amazed in silence. True religion is not a mass of idle mummeries, contentions, and debates. It is not a series of codes to be accepted in spite of better judgment. It is not an institution of obeying the dictates of God by damning unbaptized infants and burying its elect in hallowed ground. These things are the chaff that shall be tossed to the winds. These are the false doctrines, meaningless and useless, serving only as hindrances in the search for truth. True religion is that institution established by antiquity for the purpose of so unfolding the heart and mind and hand of man that he may gradually grow into that divine realization which confers immortality. That real purpose of religion is to inspire into activity and objective existence that subjective power of understanding which lies latent in the hearts and souls of unillumined humanity. And as the seekers after truth came from all parts of the ancient world, they beheld the mighty pyramid rising before them as a looming miracle in stone, a glorious house, man's supreme offering to the definitionless divinity that gives him power of recognition. The Great Pyramid was built as an imperishable monument to the divinity which lies buried in humanity. It is the tombstone of God lying in dead nature, awaiting the day of resurrection. It marks the grave of the builder. It is the sprig of acacia. And he who entered its ancient portal was consecrated to the task of raising the dead, God to life again in himself. There is a God sleeping in the soul of every man. This sleeping God is his own divinity, a spark of universal divinity imprisoned in a sarcophagus, not only in material clay, but the clay of earthly thoughts, earthly desires, and worm-like attributes. Here in the house of hidden places, man was instructed how to awaken the sleeping God, how to summon into manifestation those latent potentialities which, when trained and unfolded, produce the perfect man. The unfolding of man's spiritual nature is as much an exact science as astronomy, medicine, or jurisprudence. It is not a haphazard procedure based upon a none too certain faith. The secret process whereby the divine nature of man may be resurrected and enthroned as the ruler of human life. This is the secret science. This is the divine doctrine. This is the supreme arcana of all ages and of all people. It is to this end that all religions have been established, and out of religion have come science, philosophy, logic, and reason as methods whereby this divine purpose might be attained. Religion, therefore, represents the tree of life. The Garden of Eden is the house of the mysteries in the midst of which grows this tree, and knowledge and understanding are the fruit of the tree. And who And he who eats of that fruit shall be a god, having eternal life. But lest this fruit be stolen, lest this foolish attempt to steal the prize belonging to the wise, the supreme mystery is concealed under the emblems and symbols meaningless to the uninitiated. For being the most priceless of all human possessions, truth is guarded more sedulously than any other secret. What is there in the world that is its equal? What more can possess than understanding? All other things are impermanent, but understanding endures. All other things may be lost or destroyed, but understanding belongs forever to him who once possesses it. Through the mystic passageways and chambers of the Great Pyramid, therefore passed the illumined of antiquity. As men they entered its portal, as gods they came forth again. It was the place of the second birth, the womb of the mysteries, and wisdom dwelt in it as God dwells in the heart of man. Show the picture before I move on. It's a mighty book, I must say. I need lotion just to be able to carry it. Without it slipping out of my fingers. Somewhere in the depths of its recesses, there resides an unknown being who was called the Initiator, or the Illustrious One, robed in blue and gold and bearing in his hand the sevenfold key of eternity. This was the lion-faced Hierophant, the Ancient of Days, the Holy One, the Master of Masters, who never left the house of God, and whom no man ever saw save he who passed through the gates of preparation and purification. It was in these chambers that Plato, he of the broad brow, came face to face with the wisdom of the ages, personified in the master of the secret house. But what does this mean to the material scientist? What does this solve for the geologist, who with his little hammer chips at the casting stones and tries to solve the problem of all ages with a microscope and a pestle? What does this mean to the biblical historian, whose brows are knit over the problem of who built the world's greatest structure long before Adam and Eve must have been even remote conceptions in Jehovah's mind? Or what does it mean to the theologian who dares not peer over the edge of the King James Bible for fear of endangering his eternal salvation? Only minds trained in the free range of philosophic thinking, uncurbed by creed or dogma, unfettered by the bonds of theology or the limitations of science, and whose God is a non-sectarian deity, can face this problem without prejudice and appreciate the magnitude of true religion as herein revealed. Who was the master of the hidden house, whose many rooms signified the worlds in space, whom none might behold save those who have been born again? He knew the secret of the pyramid, but he has departed the way of the wise, and the house is empty. The hymns of praise no longer echoed in muffled tones throughout the chambers. The neophyte no longer passes through the elements and wanders among the seven stars. The candidate no longer receives the world of life from the lips of the Eternal One. Nothing remains but the shell, the outer symbol of the inner truth, and men call the house of God a tomb. The Great Pyramid is not only the house of God worthy of that appellation. Eager to receive this divine boon, the candidates, accompanied by the silent voice, the unknown watcher, climbed the ancient steps which must have originally led up to the entrance of the Great Pyramid. What lay within, he did not know. Whether he would ever come out again, he did not know. He only realized that if he failed to meet the requirements of the mysteries, he would forever vanish from the sight of men. But within that mighty pyramid of stone gleaming in the Egyptian sun, he knew there dwelt a sacred and sanctified one, the keeper of the royal secret. He was resolved to reach that one and secure that secret or die in the attempt. The time of his trial had come. His previous life, his devotion to study, his sincerity of motive, his cleanliness of heart, and all these had been thoroughly established. As he approached the tiny gate, the solid wall before him, a great stone door hung on invisible hinges of granite, swung open before him, and he passed into the darkness of the secret house. The tests began, surrounded by the gloom and cold of the sacred place. He passed in succession through the chambers and passageways which typified all the forms and experiences of mortal existence. Thus, the labors of a lifetime were recapitulated in a few hours in the great pyramid mysteries. Strange creatures confronted him. Temptations were ever about him. But at last his soul ascended as a bird up the chimney-like passageway leading up to the place of light. He passed through the dwelling places of the spirits of the gods. The earth shook and thunders rumbled about him. At last, the grand staircase of the seven breaths of the seven stars was reached, and far above, in the still unexplored pinnacle of the building, was the dwelling place of the secret God, the unknown one whose name could not be spoken, whose nature could not be conceived, and whose thoughts could not be interpreted. The details of the ceremonial are entirely a matter of speculation, for nothing is actually known concerning them save to a few, and they are not permitted to speak. But as far as can be ascertained, the king's chamber was the scene of the great climax of the initiatory drama. Here, crucified upon St. Andrew's cross, the candidate was suspended like the solar god upon the cross of the equinoxes and the solstices. After the solar crucifixion had been performed, the candidate was laid in the great stone coffin, and for 3 days his spirit freed from its mortal coil, wandering the gateways of eternity. His ka, as a bird, flew through the spiritual spheres of space. He passed upward through the seven gates and stood before the mighty throne of the Empyrean. He discovered that all the universe was life, all the universe was progress, all the universe was eternal growth. He also realized himself to be an integral part of this eternal plan, that no more could he cease to be than the sun and moon and the stars could cease to be. He conversed with the immortals. He was then brought into the blinding presence of the living Word, and then realized that his body was a house which he could slip out of and return to without death. He achieved actual immortality. It is probable that peculiar atmospheric conditions, the temperature of the king's chamber, and the dull cold of the coffin formed an important link in the chain of circumstances which permitted the consciousness of the neophyte to escape from his body and come into the presence of the great illuminator. At the end of 3 days, he returned to himself again, and having thus personally and actually experienced the great mystery, he was indeed an initiate, one who beheld, and one to whom religion had fulfilled her duty by bringing him into the light of God. The new initiate, wearing the insignia and symbol of his accomplishment, was now brought into the presence of the great illuminator, the master of the secret house. He beheld the august patriarch whom no eyes ever save those who had passed through the mystery of the philosophic death and who had been born again out of time into eternity. Mystically, there are two births. In physical birth, man is born from eternity into time, and through the span of his earthly struggle battles desperately against inevitable conquest by time. In the mysteries, there is the philosophic death, and the second birth out of time back again into eternity, and the new initiate no longer struggles against the corroding influences of time, but dwells in the perfect realization that past and future are gone, and that in the mysteries there is but one time, and that of infinite duration, eternally posited in the ever-present now. By this sage illuminator, the master of the secret house, the technique of the mysteries was unfolded. The power to know his guardian spirit was revealed to the new initiate. The method of disentangling his material body from his divine vehicle was explained. And to consummate the great work, the divine name, the secret and unutterable designation of the supreme deity, by the very knowledge of which man and his God are consciously one, was solemnly revealed. With the giving of the name, the new initiate was himself a pyramid within the chambers of those soul numberless. With the giving of the name, the new initiate was himself a pyramid, within the chambers of whose soul numberless other human beings might also receive enlightenment. Having achieved the great work, having accepted the Hierophant of the secret house as his spiritual father, the one who had given him that light which is the life of men, and having made the final offering his own life to the service of the secret house, the initiate was ushered forth again into the glare of the desert sun. When he entered, he gazed up at the mystery of the great stone pyramid, and now he gazed again, but no longer at a mystery. He beheld a great stream of light which descended from the heavens upon the pyramid. He saw it break up into numerous paths, and coming down... He saw it break up into numerous paths, and coming down the walls in all directions, diverge like branches of a tree. He realized that he himself was a branch. He was actually a fruit of the pyramidal tree. So Pythagoras-like, he took the three seeds of which tree was within the fruit of his own soul, and, going forth, he planted them. And another tree grew up from the seeds, which tree also bore the golden fruit of life, and all who partook of it lived. So we still chip at the walls of the pyramid, filled with wonder why men should have built such a structure, and what great urge inspired the Herculean labor. Gotta start that sentence over again, my God. So we still chip at the walls of the pyramid, filled with wonder why men should have built such a structure, and what urge inspired the Herculean labor. We hear men say it is the most perfect building in the world, that it is the source of weights and measures, that it was the original Noah's Ark, that it is the origin of languages and alphabets, that it is the origin of the scales of temperature and humidity, that it is the only structure upon the face of the earth that actually squares the circle, and that it stands as the absolute dividing line between land and water surfaces of the earth. We wonder at all these things, but if we really understood the purpose for which this mighty house was built, we would wonder still more, or more likely, we would scoff. For it seems incredible to this generation that there was ever a time when men knew more than men know now. Through the modern world may know a million Though the modern world may know a million secrets, the ancient world knew one, and that one was greater than the million. For the million secrets breed death, disaster, sorrow, selfishness, lust, and avarice, but the one confers life, light, and truth. The time will come when the secret wisdom shall again be dominating. There will the time will come when the secret wisdom shall again be the dominating religion and philosophical urge of the world. The day is at hand when the doom of dogma shall be sounded. The great theological Tower of Babel, with its confusion of tongues, was built with bricks of mud and mortar of slime. Out of the cold ashes of lifeless creeds, however, shall rise, phoenix-like, the ancient mysteries. No other institution so completely satisfies the religious needs of humanity. For such the destruction of the mysteries, there has never been a religious edifice wherein Plato could have worshipped. The dying God shall rise again. The secret room in the house of the hidden places shall be rediscovered. The pyramid shall yet stand as the ideal emblem of solidarity, aspiration, inspiration, resurrection, and regeneration. As the passing sands of time bury civilizations beneath their weight, the pyramid shall remain as the visible covenant between the eternal wisdom and the world. The time may yet come when the chant of the illumined shall be heard again in its ancient passageways, and the master of the hidden house await in the silent place for the coming of the seeker after the spiritual truth which the modern world needs so badly and of which it is known so little. In the ancient fragment accredited to Hermes, but by some supposed to have been written by Apelles, is a remarkable prophecy concerning the future of Egypt. Hermes is the speaker and Asclepius the one addressed. The work from which this extract is taken is called the Asclepian Dialogue, which has never been completely translated into English. Are you ignorant, O Asclepius, that Egypt is the image of heaven, or, which is more true, a translation and descent of everything which is governed and exercised in heaven? And, if it may be said, our land is truly the temple of the whole world. Nevertheless, because it becomes wise men to foreknow all things, it is not lawful that you should be ignorant. That time will come when it may seem that the Egyptians have in vain, with a pious mind and seditious religion. Sedition? No, it's not sedition, my God. I've never seen that word before. Seldus? I'm going to have to look that up after this, my God. Maybe that's a bit fucking sentence. Nevertheless, because it becomes wise men to foreknow all things, it is not lawful that you should be ignorant, that the time will come when it may seem that the Egyptians have in vain, with a pious mind and Seldus religion, paid attention to divinity, and all their holy veneration shall become void and of no effect. For divinity shall return back to heaven. Egypt shall be forsaken, and the land which was the seat of divinity shall be destitute of religion, and deprived of the presence of the gods. For when strangers shall possess and fill this region and land, there shall not only be a neglect of religion, but, which is more miserable, there shall be laws enacted against religion, piety, and divine worship. They shall be prohibited, and punishments shall be inflicted on their votaries. Then this most holy land, the seat of places constructed to divinity, and of temples, shall be full of sepulchres and dead bodies, O Egypt. Egypt, fables alone shall remain of thy religion, and these such as will be incredible to posterity, and words alone shall be left engraved in stones, narrating thy pious deeds. The Scythian also, or Indian, or some other similar nation shall inherit Egypt. For divinity shall return to heaven, all its inhabitants shall die, and thus Egypt, bereft broth of God and man, shall be deserted. I call on thee, O most holy river, and predict to thee future events. Thou shalt burst forth with a torrent of blood, full even to thy banks, and thy divine waters shall not only be polluted with blood, but the land shall be inundated with it, and the number of the dead shall exceed that of the living. He, likewise, who survives shall only by his language be known to be an Egyptian, but by his deeds he will appear to be a stranger. Why do you weep, O Asclepius? Egypt shall experience more ample and much worse evils than these, though she was once holy and the greatest lover of the gods on the earth by the desert of her religion. And she who was alone the reductor of sanctity and the mistress of piety will be an example of the greatest cruelty. Then also, through the weariness of men, the world will not appear to be an admirable and adorable thing. This whole good, a better than which, as an object of perception, there neither is, nor was, nor will be in danger, and will be grievous to men. Hence this whole world will be despised, and will not be beloved, though it is the immutable work of God, a glorious fabric, a good compounded with multiform variety of images, a machine of the will of God, who in his work gave his suffrage without envy that all things should be one. It is also a multiform, collected heap, capable of being venerated, praised, and loved by those that behold it. For darkness shall be preferred to light, and death shall be judged to be more useful than life. No one shall look up to heaven. The religious man shall be accounted insane. The irreligious shall be thought wise. The furious brave, and the worst of men shall be considered a good man. For the soul and all things about it, by which it is either naturally immortal or conceives that it shall attain to immortality, comfortably to what I have explained to you, shall not only be the subject of laughter, but shall be considered as vanity. Believe me, likewise, that a capital punishment shall be appointed for him who applies himself to the religion of intellect. New statutes and new laws shall be established, and nothing religious or which is worthy of heaven or celestial concerns shall be heard or believed by the mind. There will be a lamentable departure of the gods from men. Noxious angels will alone remain, who, being mingled with human nature, will violently impel the miserable men of that time to war, to rapine, to fraud, and to everything contrary to the nature of the soul. Then the earth shall be in a preternatural state. The seas shall not be sailed in, nor shall the heavens accord with the course of the stars, nor the course of the stars continue in the heavens. Every divine voice shall be dumb by a necessary silence. The fruits of the earth shall be corrupted, nor shall the earth be prolific, and the air itself shall languish with a sorrowful torpor. These events and such old age of the world as this shall take place, such irreligion, inordination, and unreasonableness of all good, when all these things shall happen, O Asclepius, then that Lord and Father, the God who is first in power and the governor of the world, looking into the manners and voluntary deeds of men, and by his will, which is the benignity of God. I remember what benighted means. O Asclepius, then that Lord and Father, the God who is first in power, and the governor of the world, looking into the manners and voluntary deeds of men, and by his will, which is the benignity of God, resisting vices and recalling the error arising from the corruption of all things, washing away likewise all malignity by a deluge, or consuming it by fire, or bringing it to an end by disease and pestilence, dispersed in different places, will recall the world to its ancient form, in order that the world itself may appear to be an admirable and imitable production. And God, the fabricator and restorer of so great a work, may be celebrated by all that shall then exist with frequent solemn praises and benedictions. And I believe we're done. Yep, that's it. And that was The Phoenix, an illustrated review of occultism and philosophy by the legend Manly P. Hall.